Jill. Hey, Sharon and Bill.
Hi, Liz, Jill, and Liz. Hey, everybody. We're going to give just a couple more minutes and let some people come in because they're coming in fast and furious.
No
picture.
I don't know how to get a picture.
He was on the committee. He's good.
How about if
I have oodles of room.
Hello, Corinne.
Richard Spiegel, you're feeling okay?
Yeah, how about you, Billy?
We're doing well. Life is good, sir.
Good. You look like a million, both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my God. You could be poster children for Bethel.
Oh,
For the older generation.
Well, don't talk about older.
I was going to say children might be a little. All right, I think we're going to start because it's 7 o'clock or thereabouts, and let's get going. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jerry Ribnick. I've been privileged to be a co-chair of the search committee for the next assistant rabbi at Bethel Synagogue. Over the last 10 plus months, my co-chair Adrian Berman and the rest of the committee we did focus groups, listening sessions, correspondence, and conversation with the congregation in order to determine what you felt we need for our next clergy. We heard that you told us we need an individual with great energy, a passion for youth involvement, social justice, and reaching out to the less engaged. We want an individual that complements what we already have, and most importantly, we want somebody that's a mensch. I'm so honored to officially introduce you to Rabbi Rachel Simmons, a rabbi that definitely exemplifies all those qualities that you said Bethel needs. She's a curious and compassionate listener, a spirit advocate for justice and interfaith work, and is committed to Ahavat Yisrael, the love of Judaism and Israel. Over the years, Rabbi Simmons has worked in a preschool in Washington, D.C. She's taught English overseas in both Costa Rica and Austria, has spent time as a chaplain offering compassion in times of need for ritual events and for pastoral care. And she will soon be graduating and receiving her ordination from the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies at the American Jewish University, which is the conservative Jewish seminary in California. She has spent years studying Jewish texts there and in Israel, and has served on both coasts as a rabbinic intern, co-leading services that are, as she describes them at once, personal, accessible, and steeped in tradition. She loves engaging others with both Torah and song and helping people create meaningful relationships with Judaism, the synagogue, and the community. Her enthusiasm is infectious, and I'm sure you're going to feel that tonight and throughout this weekend. So I could go on, but instead, let's spend the time learning with Rabbi Simmons. So please help me give a warm Bethel Zoom welcome to Rabbi Rachel Simmons.
Shalom. A warm Zoom welcome to all of you. I'm gonna tilt this a little bit. There we go. Hi, I've only been here in Minnesota for 24 hours and I'm already saying, oh, here we go, here we go. So I hope that that is a good reflection of how incredibly welcomed I have felt so far. I am absolutely thrilled to see those of you I can see. I can't even see all of you on my screen, but it is fantastic to be able to see your faces and to be able to get to know you a little bit in this medium. I hope to get to know as many of you as I can over the course of this weekend, but if you have a question for me, if you have a comment, if you have feedback, feel free to just contact Jerry, contact Adrienne, contact anyone who's here at Bethel, and they can get your question to me. Now, tonight, the topic I was given was social justice, which is near and dear to my heart, and I know to all of yours. One of the things I love about our tradition is that in any Torah portion, in any week of reading that Jews dive into around the globe, there is the potential to find the roots of inspiration for social justice work and for helping make this world a better and a more righteous place. And so I thought for tonight, what better thing to do than to look at this week's Torah portion and at last week's Torah portion, which both together described the building of the Mishkan that our ancestors made as a house for God in the desert while they wandered. I wanted to look at these Torah portions and find what I saw as some roots or some inspiration for social justice work. So the last little bit of background that I will give you before I dive into the teaching is that we're going to be looking at Midrash. Midrash is just a special word that we use that means rabbi fan fiction. If you're familiar with rabbi fan fiction, our rabbis over the centuries have studied and studied and studied the Torah. And when they have a question or when they see a gap in the story and they want to fill it with their imagination, they write Midrash. And so today we're going to read some chunks of Torah, and then we're going to look at a Midrash and then have a discussion together. I would ask only if you have something to say, if you could use the little hand raising button so that I can call on you. That way we don't have a cacophony. However, I would love to hear from you. I would love this to be a discussion and not just me talking at you, because at the end of the day, we are a community. And with that, I would like to begin. So I believe that Liz has just dropped into the chat and has dropped a source sheet for all of you. I have a hard copy of it here. It looks like this. If you click on that link that's in the chat, you should be able to open up a Google Doc that has a whole bunch of different sources on it. You don't have to follow along on the source sheet. I'm also going to be talking through it. And I'm also going to be asking for a couple of volunteers throughout our hour together to help me read, to help me process, and to kind of remind each other that when we're talking about social justice, as with all things, it's 2 Jews, 5 opinions, or in this case, at least 92 Jews, 500 opinions, or however many it is and however many it ends up being. Whatever it is that we're bringing to this space is sacred, and it's a conversation that we are building together along with our ancestors and along with these sacred words. The very first text that's on this, this sheet, which starts with "So the people," is taken from earlier in Exodus. It's not from this week's Torah portion, and it's not from last week's Torah portion, but it's here to set the stage. It's here to set the stage. What just happened before this chunk of text is that there were plagues in Egypt, and all of our ancestors who had been slaves, who had been mistreated, who had been marginalized, were finally told that they could leave. Finally, they were able to leave their life of oppression and journey out into the wilderness. Could I have a volunteer to read this first text that starts with "So the people"? You could also read it in Hebrew if you'd like, but then I will also read it in English. But I am a fan of having Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language, also be spoken in this conversation if somebody would like to. Is there somebody who could read that first text in either Hebrew or English? If so, either unmute yourself or raise your hand. Anybody? No.
I'll do it. This is Alan Bernard.
Thank you, Alan Bernard.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll just read it in English. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks upon their shoulders. The Israelites had done Moses' bidding and borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold and clothing. And the Lord had disposed the Egyptians favorably toward the people, and they let them have their request. Thus they stripped the Egyptians.
Thus they stripped the Egyptians. It's kind of a harsh word. It's also harsh in the Hebrew there. So looking at this text, what does the silver and gold and clothing represent? What does it represent? Why did they take it? It's not a right or wrong answer. What do you think? Why did our ancestors take the silver and gold and clothing from the Egyptians? Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand. Ken
I
and
would
Lynn.
say it was reparations for all of the slavery, many years of slavery and hard work.
I am so glad you brought that word into this space. Yes, a lot of commentators have called this transaction, for lack of a better word, in which the gold and the silver and the clothes left the possession of the Egyptians, who were disposed favorably by God towards the Israelites, and went into the possession of the Israelites as reparations because our ancestors had been badly treated. Yes. All right. The second piece of text that we have here, is there somebody who would be willing to read this text? The Lord spoke to Moses.
I will,
Thank you.
Louise. Okay. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Israel, vayikhu li truma, me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo, tikhu et trumatai, v'zot ha-truma asher tikhu me'itam, zahav v'chesef u'nechoshet.
Toda rabah. Yasher koach. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves him. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper. Where did that gold and silver come from?
From the Egyptians.
From the Egyptians. So the gold and silver that came from the Egyptians, that went potentially as reparations to the Israelites, is now being commanded by God to be used to build the Mishkan. That piece of Torah was from last week's Torah portion. Now we're going to read a chunk from this week's Torah portion. Could I have another volunteer to read this line from Exodus 28:36?
I have a question. Can I throw one in?
Of course.
Mike, we don't have the text in front of us because we came a little late. But I'm wondering if there was anything in the text or in other Midrash that says the Egyptians gave them everything. Here they had gone through 10 plagues. The Jews perhaps were seen as all powerful. They just beat out pigs. So, you know, they're going on a trip. We need clothes and money. And I'm wondering if it happened the other way around, that the Egyptians said, here, get this, take this and leave. Go, go, go.
Excellent question. So again, we're talking with Midrash here. So Midrash is where we get to be part of the conversation, where we fill in the blanks. And exactly that sort of a question is the sort of question that Midrash handles with. Not every commentator sees this transaction as reparations, but in general, it usually is seen as something that is owed, for lack of a better word. Something that is owed.
It's like rightful retribution.
Rightful retribution, perhaps. So
no, wait a minute. It's rightful retribution, but it's a harbinger of things to come. It tells us that this is going to be the beginning of the building of the Mishkan, and without that, we wouldn't have the beautiful Mishkan that Hashem has promised.
Yes, so there is this beautiful, longer term story. If we zoom out and we look at the story, not just as that moment where the Israelites are leaving Egypt, and not just as that moment where they are asked to build the Mishkan, if we look at it as this long thread that's connected, we can see how the consequences of one action or the consequences of one situation are connected to another. Thank you for that. Yes, there is definitely a connection being drawn here. Barbara?
Yeah, yes, I have a question comment because the word that bothers me in the first section that we read is the word borrowed. They weren't borrowing anything. They were taking it for whatever purposes. And so why would it be that word borrowed?
So the Hebrew is yishal'u, which is that they asked for the things. And this is another one where we could have an interesting conversation of what that request looked like. You know, did the Israelites go to the Egyptians and say, hello, can I have your gold for the rest of my life? Or did they say, hi, could I have your gold? I'm going for a long walk. Or did they say, hello, I've noticed your gold is so lovely. Could I hold it for a minute? We honestly don't know. The word yishal'u has that word in it for question. So we know it wasn't just taking. There was a conversation happening. That's built into the word. But we don't know exactly what that question was. So it's fantastic that you saw that word and that it kind of clicked in your brain. So thank you for that.
Another question.
Yep, I see Gary.
It's Mike Blehert, Sue
Oh,
Blehert. Oh, I'm
great.
sorry. Well,
Sorry, multiple people had their hands up. This is great. Go for it.
Is there anything in the Midrash that connects the gold, the zahav, with zahav the eagle, the golden calf?
So
And Aaron decided it had to be gold.
So another question, if we're looking at that longer thread of consequence, of times of riches and times when we have less, and times when we perhaps make better decisions and times when we make worse decisions, the golden calf is another great moment. Not a great moment in the sense of a moment we should repeat, but a great moment in the sense of a significant moment on that long thread. So the question of how much of the gold was used where? When did they decide I'm going to hold some back? What if they had used some of the gold before, but held some back? And now God is saying, you have to use that to build the Mishkan. We don't actually know exactly. We don't.
Well, what we do know is that Aaron told Moses he took this material and threw it into the fire, and out came the eagle. That's what we do know. And I think measurement wasn't part of that situation. He just did it.
True.
I think it's something beyond being able to explain how much went here and how much went there. I don't think that's the where this is all going.
We honestly don't know. I guess for me, when I imagine being one of our ancestors, and of course I wasn't there, but when I imagine being in this mindset, if I've had nothing for so long and I come into possession of something so precious, I could imagine that if Aaron or if another one of my leaders was grabbing the gold and throwing it into the fire, I could imagine hiding some of that or keeping some of it, you know, or holding it away and trying to protect it because for so long I hadn't had anything.
Right.
I could imagine that, but I don't know because I wasn't there. All I know is what the text teaches me, which is that at these different times, both at the time of the golden calf and at the time of the building of the Mishkan, our ancestors had gold and had silver, and that the time that they had gotten those things coming into their possession was when they left Egypt.
Can I add something? I don't know how to raise hand.
Go for it.
Colin and Wendy Smith, and welcome. Thanks for doing this. So one thought I just had about borrowed is that it's not inconsistent to use the word borrowed if in fact they were taking it and then later they were donated to Mishkan. It actually seems very consistent.
That's actually a very beautiful reminder of what Richard was saying before about that thread and about how there is that, you know, God perhaps could see that longer thread of the journey that gold was going to take before any of the people involved could. The Israelites didn't know when they took that gold that the Mishkan was going to be built, but maybe God did. Gary, I want to get back to you because you've had your hand up so patiently.
Yes, and I will try to remember to put my hand down now. Welcome to town. Thanks for coming.
It's a pleasure, Peter.
So you started the story at a particular point, and if you were planning to get back to the middle, to the beginning later, do it in your own time. But I noticed that you started it with the Israelites asking for the gold. You didn't start a chapter earlier where God instructs the Israelites to go get these things. So
Yes.
Curious as to why you started where you did, and because it frames the question really differently, because this is a society probably much more than ours at this particular juncture, where it's not so surprising if they're going to be just simply following God's instructions, and God's instructions are go get gold and silver.
Definitely. So I chose this particular chunk for two reasons. One of which was because I felt that the line in it that the Lord had disposed the Egyptians favorably towards the people similarly accomplished that this was God's will in that moment for whatever reason, but that this was something that God was supporting. So I felt that that was accomplished by that line. But I also, the very first line of this chunk with, so the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks upon their shoulders. I enjoyed including that because I feel like it paints a picture for what our ancestors were going through emotionally, how rushed they were, how much they were carrying with them both physically and emotionally at that time, and kind of sets the stage how in the midst of all of this chaos and leaving this life they knew, they then stopped. And for whatever reason, again, I'm not entirely certain, but for whatever reason, went to the Egyptians and asked for the gold and silver. That's why I chose this particular set of psukim. Thank you for asking. Sylvia, did you have a question? No. Okay. All right. So there is one more. I will read this last chunk, which is from this week's Torah portion. And you shall make a show plate of pure gold, and you shall engrave upon it like the engraving of a seal, holy to the Lord. So this is gold, pure gold, and literally on this gold chunk it says, holy to the Lord, out of this gold. Are we ready for some Midrash? Yeah? All right, let's play with this a little bit. Now, when I say play, I don't necessarily mean it's all going to be fun. I'm simply saying playing in the rabbinic tradition of saying, what could be the significance of all these different metals? What could be the significance of the fact that the Egyptians had this wealth, this metal, and they were harming our ancestors? And then our ancestors came into possession of it. And now God is saying, make a house for me out of it and put on it literally holy, that this metal is holy. Let's explore together, shall we? Could I have a volunteer to read? And these are the gifts. This first line is simply quoting that Torah portion we just read. And then it's going to start when it says the gold corresponds to the kingdom of Babylon. This is where we get into that fan fiction commentary discussion of perhaps what is the significance of all of this precious metal. So could I have somebody volunteer to read? Heidi. Oh, I think you're still on mute, Heidi.
Unmute. Okay.
Oh,
now
there we go. Yeah.
back to, okay, so and tell me if I'm in the right spot now. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Mhm.
Gold, silver, and copper. Midrash, the gold corresponds to the kingdom of Babylon, as it is written concerning her, thou art the head of gold.
Yes, so I'm
We're
going to
still-
pause for a second there and simply say that is in another part in Daniel where we are talking about Babylon, which was seen as an oppressor at that time. And so the gold is there describing Babylon in another part of the Tanakh. You can keep reading.
The silver corresponds to the kingdom of Media, as it is written, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver.
So I'll pause you there and say that's actually Haman, who is saying that line. Again, against what is seen as an oppressive kingdom. Continue.
And the brass corresponds to the kingdom of Greece, which was the least powerful, should I stop? The
You say powerful.
least powerful of all. The Holy One, obsessed be he, said, even though you suffered because of the 4 arrogant kingdoms that attacked you, I will bring salvation onto you from the midst of servitude.
From the midst of servitude, from Tanchuma. There we go. So this Midrash is a rabbi's interpretation of what those metals that took that journey. We were just talking about the journey that the metal took. So each of those metals represents something different. And according to this rabbi, these precious metals are sources of oppression. They represent different oppressive powers in the history of our people. So here we're going to start and kind of get into our big questions about oppression and redemption. I have here, if you look at the questions at the bottom of the text study, you can follow along if you want, but I would encourage you not to read them all at once because it'll start to become a jumble in your head of a whole bunch of words. It always becomes a jumble in my head.
I don't see them.
So right underneath that last piece of text that Heidi read, so beautifully, thank you, Heidi. Oh, and by the way, Heidi, you are still unmuted, just so you know. Underneath that, there are some questions. The first one is, in the Midrash, precious metals represent sources of oppression, which are then used in service of God. So they go from being sources of oppression, have that entire journey, and then end up being used in the service of God to build a holy home, to build a mishkan, a place where God is at home. What does this Midrash say then about the relationship between wealth, oppression, and potential redemption? Between wealth, oppression, where it began, and the potential for redemption. What is this text saying to us about those things? Think about that for a second. Anyone who has a thought? Oh, Donna.
Okay, there we go. That in the hands of oppressors,
Could be.
the metals are agents of evil. That's not exactly the right word, but at 2 in the morning when it comes to me, I'll call you. But when the metals are taken and used in the service of the Lord, then they take on a much more acceptable use. And in the Mishkan, it's a place where everybody can be immersed in the wealth, can see it all around them.
So it's not that it's an inherent part of wealth in general that is evil or that is good. It's whether it's in the hands of those who are using it for oppression, or whether it's in the hands of those who are using it to follow the will of God.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
All right, I see some more people. Karen and Russ Rubin.
Yeah, hi, this is Russ. Wealth is one of the great components of inequality. And those with wealth use that to differentiate themselves from those without wealth, and use that as a way of keeping the thumb on those people without wealth. And to switch that is a great indicator of a change in paradigm and a change in relationship that is kind of punitive in a way as well.
Thank you. Excellent point. Excellent point. Susan? Or, yes, that isn't Susan, but
It's Mike, it's close.
hi, Mike.
Hi, welcome to Bethel, or welcome to this coming here. The metals went, at least in the standpoint of gold, it went for more than the Mishkan, in that we also use the metals to, I don't know if glorify is the right word, but maybe add respect to the priesthood, because in one of the chapters of Exodus, it talks about holy to the Lord was the band held by purple strings over the high priest on the high holidays. And there's, the picture of the crown, and then the not a breastplate, a head plate or forehead plate, holy to the Lord. I think it's the only place it's mentioned in the Torah. I'm not sure of that.
I have to check.
So that's another use of the gold in a fashion, as Donna said, that is perhaps more respectful than, you don't make swords out of gold, but making swords out of metal. So.
And for beauty, and the question of what are these the only two categories, oppression and redemption? Or is there another question of glory and beauty somewhere in there? And what is that value, and when do we make that choice? We also spoke earlier about the golden calf. That was the Israelites using the gold for something that perhaps was closer to oppression than it was to redemption. So there are many, many uses for these metals that we see throughout this journey. All right, next, I think Gary, or somebody who maybe isn't Gary, but is on the screen with Gary.
Me? Am I on? Hi, I'm Dory.
Hi.
I go with her. So I was going to say that, throughout the Torah and throughout time, we're always reminded that we were strangers in a strange land, and that God redeemed us. And here we are with these fancy schmancy precious metals. And maybe the whole connection between the two is to keep us humble. And even though you have this beautiful Mishkan made with these precious metals, but remember, there's a history there, and remember where you came from.
I was saying to someone this morning when I was in the chapel and with I think I was saying it to Liz, that with the was Liz? Liz, I hope it was you. I don't know. With the stained glass, how it must have been, if I imagine either back, during medieval times looking at the cathedrals, or if I imagine our ancestors in tents or building their Sukkot in the desert, and then looking at this Mishkan, it must have been incredible. It must have truly been something to behold in a way that I don't know if there's something in our lives today that's quite the same. I don't know what would be that parallel in our lives today. So maybe we've actually lost something by growing into a society where metal's all over the place. And, or who knows what they would have thought of plastic while making the Mishkan. What have we actually lost by losing our reverence for these precious metals? It's a really interesting direction. Richard, your hand's up again, but you're muted. Hi.
To me, this is actually a progression. It's a progression from evil, which these metals can be used for, and in man's hand, they can be turned to something that is godly.
Yeah.
I think it's a very deep message for us.
Yeah.
So money isn't bad; it's how it's used can be bad, and I think that's what the rabbis are trying to tell us.
I definitely agree. I think that is one of the very deep truths of this Midrash here. Definitely agreed. I think someone else had their hand up as well, but I'm not seeing it now. We're going to go to the next question. I want to make sure we keep moving forward. So number 2, talking a little bit more about our lives. What does the relationship between money and religion look like in our lives? We're seeing in this Midrash a little bit about what these metals meant to the Israelites and in their expression of religion and their expression of devotion to God. But what about us? Riches, wealth. What does the relationship between money or wealth and religion look like in our lives? And what do these texts suggest it should look like? So there's two parts. What does it look like? And what do these texts suggest it should look like? And this is kind of complicated. I want to remind you, I ask this question not because I think I have one clear answer, but because I'm curious what all of you as Jews, when we read these texts that are our shared inheritance, I think there are truths that we can pull out of this to apply to our lives and the way we try to change the world more towards redemption as opposed to oppression. So what does this text offer us as a truth about what the relationship between money and religion could look like for us? And also, I can't see everybody's hands at once because there are a lot of people on the call, so feel free to unmute yourself if you're trying to say something and I'm not calling on you. All right, Mike.
I'll throw one more out there. I can't quote it, but about 12 years ago, Bethel was remodeled. We brought it up to date in terms of handicap access and all sorts of things in a small addition. And I remember Rabbi Davis talking from the Bima before we started, and he talked about a bottle of wine. And he said, the wine is sweet. It's meant for joy, celebration, but you can't have a good bottle of wine without the bottle being in good condition. And I think he carried on into Jews pray and work together as a community. We're not individuals. We work in a minyan, if you will. And so we raise money to protect our bottle of wine, the synagogue, or to improve it and to make it more useful. So there's a use of money related to religion, at least in our congregation. We can certainly go well beyond that, but I'll leave it at that.
What about tzedakah? I ask because I believe there is a difference between charity, begadol, just charity, and tzedakah, and this value, this commandment we have as Jews to give money, to give resources, to give time, but also to give money. What can this text teach us about money and religion through the lens of tzedakah? Joanne?
Well, I admit I may have missed one sentence a while ago because I'm helping something urgent also. But in the translation of the text, it said, I believe God said, ask them for the gold and the silver and those who are disposed to do it, take it from those who are disposed. So number one, God is saying, take it from those who are willing. Now, we have 10 plagues that might have made them willing. So that's not something we can answer very well. But I think that the question of wealth is, how did you come by the wealth? Did you kill other people to get the wealth? Did you cause harm to get the wealth? Or did you work hard to earn some wealth? So that's one of the questions. But another question, the question you asked, how does religion influence this? And, there's tithes, we're told all the time to give tzedakah, and not only with money, but with our talents, with our abilities. So.
Yes. Actually, what you were just saying about where the money comes from is a really great bridge into the next question. So if anybody has thoughts on question 2, feel free to come back to them, but I'm actually going to go to question 3 because that's such a good segue. Question 3 is, how do our obligations to ourselves, our obligations to others, to Judaism, and to God change when we come into possession of wealth? Does it matter where the wealth comes from? So let's sit with that one for a second, because this isn't just a theoretical question. We're all humans. We all exist within a system where we give money and we receive goods. Maybe we receive money and we give goods, maybe both. We all live in a system where in order to function in society, it's not just theoretical to ask what we do with our wealth and what we do with our resources and what we do with our time. So if we were to say, theoretically, view our own lives as a timeline, or our own wealth, our own resources as going on a journey similar to that gold and that silver we talked about that went from the Egyptians and went with our ancestors to be used for various things, including the golden calf, but also the Mishkan, and also those headpieces and the breastplate that says holy. What would that look like for our wealth? How do our obligations change to each other? Joanne mentioned tithing, for example, the idea that when we have a certain amount of wealth, that we are obligated to give a certain amount of it back. Does anybody else have a thought about how our obligations change when we come into possession of wealth, and whether or not it matters where that wealth comes from? What do you think? I'm seeing some smiles, some nods, some head shakes. Bill and Sharon.
I'm muted now.
Oh, you want me to talk?
Oh, Dan, you are unmuted.
Yes.
You can talk.
Go ahead, we're Bill and Sharon.
All right, Bill and Sharon.
I was just thinking that it indicates that there's a moral component to money, and that the value of it isn't just that you have it, but what you do with it to help the world be a better place.
One of the great tragedies, I feel like, of the narrative around money is that when we talk about a moral component with money, it's that we attach a moral value to whether or not a person has money.
Yeah.
And so then we think that those who are rich are somehow more moral and those who are poor are somehow less. But what you just said, Sharon, actually, could you repeat that? Because I think that's a beautiful alternative framework for the morals of money.
That it's not that you have money, but what you do with it to make the world a better place, to give tzedakah and make the world a better place. That's the real value of the money.
So yeah, so it's not that there's no connection between morals and money. It's just that perhaps traditionally we've looked at it the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it's a different type of moral obligation and moral impetus. Heidi. Oh, you're muted again. Sorry.
The question comes back to one thing that you mentioned, which is the source of your money, the source of your wealth. How did you get it? Is it by taking advantage of others or by simply working hard? You may even be in your working hard helping others, hopefully. And so does that make a difference? I mean, I think that when the synagogue takes—
You might have to unmute it again. It mutes all the time.
Dan, you're unmuted. Oh, there we go. Thanks.
When the synagogue accepts contributions from people, or any organization accepts contributions or donations, I'm not sure they ask exactly how the person making the donation got that money. I'm sure that they do not.
So I will touch on this very gently, but there could be a much bigger conversation about this. It is a very real question, unfortunately, within organizations. If they receive money from individuals and those individuals go on to, say, be convicted of various crimes, then what should the organization do with that money? Should they give it back? Should they rename the building that they had named after the person? Should they demolish the building they had named after the person? Chas v'shalom. But what do we do when the resources that were shared with us that we have then used for what we believe is good, when we find out they came from a source that we can no longer say aligns with our values? What do we do? And I can't, from my position, tell you there's one answer, because honestly, it really, in each situation, different organizations, different Jewish organizations with values that are very similar to each other have come to different decisions while wrestling with exactly this. So Heidi, I'm glad you bring that up, because it isn't a theoretical question. This is a real issue. Or even in our personal lives, not talking just about organizations. What happens if I inherit money from a relative who I know has done harmful things? What do I do with that money? Are there limits? Are there things I specifically should do? It's always an emotional question, but it's a very real question. So we have a couple minutes left. I want to get to these last two. Oh, I saw someone raising their hand. Yes, SLTAP. I don't know what's your name?
I'm another Sharon.
Hi, Sharon.
And I live a block away from the other Sharon, so there's two of us. Anyway, just kind of going back, hi neighbor, just going back as a comment. I think a lot of it, in my opinion, has to do with how you've been raised. What you see your siblings do, what you see your parents do, what you see your grandparents. Yeah, you inherit. But it's also not only what I do, it's what I do for my children and my grandchildren to teach them about tzedakah. And it doesn't matter if you give $5 or nothing at all. If you give of yourself, how very important I feel it is.
Yes, giving, all giving is very important. Definitely. Mike?
When you originally posed the question, you used the word obligation.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate. What obviously what we want, Sharon mentioned it, and I can't remember who else, but you want to give from the heart. So the real question is, how somehow does society or individuals in society change, especially if they have wealth, to feel not an obligation, but empathy and other terms like that to give? You know, it's a common theme in half the movies and half the, the Christmas stories. Which the one with the Wonderful Life or the Scrooge or whoever, and I'm sure there's hundreds of shows like that, or books, what have you. So it's the heart rather than the obligation. I'm not sure how to get there.
I definitely agree that empathy is crucial in all of this. I would say, though, I'm just going to go on an aside here for a second. Anita Diamant is an amazing author who has many amazing books. One of her amazing books is Choosing a Jewish Life. When I was coming to Judaism, I converted. And when I was coming to Judaism, I read the book Choosing a Jewish Life. And in her section where she describes tzedakah, and she describes the difference between tzedakah and charity, she describes how beautiful it is, specifically, so I'm going to wait for a second, there we go. She describes how beautiful it is to be obligated to tzedakah, and gives the following example. I'm kind of paraphrasing it because it's been a while since I've read the book, but I'm going to share it with you because it really stuck with me. She described how if you have a person experiencing homelessness and they don't have a lot of resources and they are approached by two people, the first one is warm and is loving and is caring and asks them how they are and hands them a crisp $5 bill. And the second person is brusque and rude and feels like they have to give and throws them a $100 bill. Which person would that person who is experiencing homelessness rather run into? The one who kindly and lovingly gives the $5 bill from the depths of their heart, or the $100 bill that's thrown? Of course, don't get me wrong. We should not be throwing tzedakah at anyone. We should be giving with warmth. We should be giving with love. However, I also think for the moments in life when we are not in that mental space to give full of empathy, and when we are not in that space to give in an ideal way, I think it's a gift our tradition gives us that we are obligated. I think it is a gift that our tradition gives us that says, I don't care if you're having a bad day, you have to help those who are less fortunate, period. So the use of the word obligation here is intentional because of that nuance. But I would very much agree with you that we also have to work on empathy, and that empathy is what makes it into that ideal giving experience. So I'm really glad you mentioned that so that we could kind of focus in on obligation for a second. It's part of our Jewish identities that I know I wrestle with a lot, but I'm really glad I have to wrestle with it. We have just a couple minutes left, so I want to go to question number 4. And I want to name, before we discuss question number 4, that this is indeed a question that is alluding to anti-Semitism. This is a question that alludes to the fact that there are other people in the world who are not wishing us well and who talk about wealth and Jews in a way that is poisonous. And that is a reality of the world that we live in. So with that in mind, as Jews, is our relationship to wealth different? And should it be, for better or for worse? Is it different? Is there something that we should be feeling that's different about wealth compared to other people?
Yes, my name is Howard.
Hi.
And I'd like to make a comment about in the sense of monetary. I give of myself because I wish to give without asking for anything in return. I've been an educator in the synagogue for over 12 years in their educational program. And I feel that when one gives of themselves without considering the idea of the monetary amount, it helps you to reassure yourself that you know that you're doing a positive thing, and you're hopeful that the money that you're giving out of the goodness of your heart will be used to maybe perhaps help other people of all ages who have special needs or have concerns. And I think that is what is of a positive note. And that's what we need in this world, is to have more caring individual people.
Amen. Amen. Yes, I agree very much.
And I'm enlightened by a lot of the spiritual thoughts that you are giving and expressing in your comments. And I'm looking forward to eventually returning to the synagogue. I would like very much to be able to participate in a lot of the programs, but due to the circumstances that we are involved with the disease, I find it difficult to come, and I really appreciate the virtual programs that are being offered, which allow me to be able to relate and discuss certain views that you're bringing up, which are very important. So thank you very much.
Zoom is indeed a miracle of our modern age. I'm the first to admit that I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with the internet before the pandemic, but the fact that I can be sitting here and can see so many faces and hear so many voices and take part in this conversation, I mean, it's bittersweet. Yes, there is the bitter, but there's also the sweet. And I really feel it, especially when we're having this kind of a conversation and I'm seeing people nod and I'm seeing people turn to the person next to them and have little conversations. And it's beautiful. And it's beautiful in a way that we maybe didn't have a couple of years ago. So I'm really grateful for it. So thank you. And I'm glad you are here with us too. I want to turn away then, we only have 4 minutes left. What I'd like to invite all of you to do, the last thing I have on this sheet is to describe a takeaway from this Midrash and this discussion. But I'd like to invite all of you to open up the chat feature here on Zoom and to type in a takeaway from the texts we've looked at, from the different opinions, from the different questions, something for your life, something about making the world a better place, something about a relationship or a quote or something that you think might stick with you from this lesson and this discussion. There's not a right or wrong. And as with all things in our tradition, it's kind of meant to be mulled over and returned to and dug into over time. But I would really love it if as many of you as feel so moved would go into the chat and just share with me and with the other people on the call. What is the takeaway that you have from this discussion? I do truly believe that we as Jews have a unique responsibility to help make the world a better place in many ways. And that one of those ways is in utilizing our resources for good to whatever extent we can. And I think that this story of the way that we took those resources, those reparations, and that we used them to build a home for God is a beautiful one. So I look forward to reading everything that is there in the chat. If anybody else wants to if anyone else wants to send me an email, you're welcome to. Here, I'll put my email even in the chat if any of you would like to send me an email. And I will be here at Beth El for Kabbalat Shabbat tomorrow night and also on Saturday morning. And I would love to see as many of you as I can and to say hello, maybe chat a bit at Kiddush. I see a couple, there we go. I see a couple takeaways so far. And thank you all very much.
That's me. What? You could probably hear that.
Laila Tov.
Stay warm.
Thank you.
I'm trying. The community has been so fantastic. I've been given a head mask and gloves and all kinds of stuff. Chocolate.
I'm surprised you didn't turn around and went back to LA.
No. Today was the first time seeing snowfall for me in like 6 years. And I was like a little kid. I was so thrilled. Gary, is your hand raised again? No, okay. Because there's a little hand, God, no.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Gary, thank you for the chocolate.
You're welcome.
Thank
That's your
you.
koach.
Ready
to leave?
I'm leaving.
Yeah. Okay.